Salt!
We're in the autumn of 2014 and expect the Dietary Guidelines of 2015 to be available soon. As most of you know, the Dietary Guidelines are reviewed every 5 years to make certain that all of the latest medical and nutritional evidence is taken into account. Unfortunately, with reference to salt, this has not been the case. Despite the growing evidence on the unsuitability and risks associated with population-wide sodium reduction, this dogmatic approach has been pursued by the last several versions of the Dietary Guidelines. The evidence against this approach has piled up during the last 5 years and can no longer be swept under the rug. It's clear that the only potential beneficiaries of salt reduction reside in a minor portion of the population that are salt sensitive and suffer from hypertension. It was always rationalized with a shrug of the shoulders saying, so what? A big drop in salt intake won't harm the rest of the population, so let's promote it. You have all seen the propaganda about all the salt that is supposedly hidden in your foods. You've also seen a big group of food companies claiming that they're going to reduce salt in the foods they produce. All of that was in response to the idea that cutting salt won't harm the majority of the population. Well, this notion is not in any way supported by the available scientific data. The most recent evidence indicates that the great majority of the population will face negative consequences of elevated renin and aldosterone, that hormonal system that kicks in whenever we reduce salt. Consequences that include cardiovascular events and insulin resistance, which is a precursor to diabetes. So the question that the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Group has to answer is population-wide salt reduction resulting in a small benefit to a minor portion of the population, while at the same time increasing the risk of mortality and ill health to the remainder of the population, a rational, or is it an unconscionable dietary policy? As I said, the evidence continues to pour in. One of this month's issues of the New England Journal of Medicine highlighted the latest research on the influence of sodium consumption on health. The first study covered more than 100,000 adults sampled from the general population of 17 countries. The authors concluded that a very small proportion of worldwide population consumes a low sodium diet of less than 2,300 milligrams per day, and that sodium intake is not, repeat, not related to blood pressure in these persons. Of course, this calls into question the usefulness of reducing dietary sodium as a population-based strategy for reducing blood pressure. Another paper describes a very large study over several countries that demonstrates that sodium intakes between 3,000 and 6,000 milligrams per day were associated with the lowest risk of death and cardiovascular events. This optimal safe range is far above the current recommendations of 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams sodium per day that have been published in the 2010 Dietary Guidelines. Yet another recent study sponsored by the World Health Organization, or WHO, analyzed the consumption of sodium around the world and revealed that 73% of countries around the world consume a medium level of between 2,800 and 5,500 milligrams sodium per day. Americans fall right in the middle of this broad range. So if anyone ever tells you that we consume high levels of salt, you can quote the latest evidence from the World Health Organization, showing that we do no such thing. Only 1% of the countries in the world consume a high level of sodium above 5,500 milligrams per day, and about 25% of countries, all in the lower income range, where salt is an expensive addition to the diet, consumes less than 2,800 milligrams per day. And Kenya, with a life expectancy of 60 years, is the only country in the world that consumes the American Heart Association's extreme recommendation of less than 1,500 milligrams sodium per day. In fact, when the WHO figures on life expectancy data are compared to the WHO sodium consumption data, it's clear that both the low levels of less than 2,800 and the high levels of more than 5,500 milligrams of sodium per day result in lower life expectancies than the median range of 2,800 to 5,500 milligrams sodium per day. And this confirms the latest evidence on death and cardiovascular events. It also confirms the U.S. status as being amongst those countries with the highest life expectancies. I hope that this new 2015 edition of the Dietary Guidelines comes clean on salt and incorporates all the new evidence of the last 5 years. It's time to break the Dietary Guidelines' incessant cycle of evidence denial in pursuit of a policy that can only harm consumers.
Salt!